This is Transformers. Roian Atwood.
I was kind of shocked when I heard what VF and this gentleman, Rowan, were doing as far as the environment goes. Shocked in an incredibly happy way. So I'm happy to present Rowan Atwood here and to explain what VF and he are doing and how they're affecting the environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us here. This is my first Kingpins and Transformers show, so thank you, Andrew, for inviting us. Today I'm going to speak mostly about the Wrangler platform, but we also have Lee in the audience as well, so welcome, guys. Oh, there's the clicker. Okay, great. So actually I wanted to start in a little bit of a different place. I wanted to begin with talking about purpose a little bit. And purpose is one of those big sort of fundamental questions, right? It's why do we exist? What is our purpose? An interesting place to start. It's purpose-driven brands has obviously been in the news frequently, and there's a wide variety of different words that could represent purpose. Whether it be your dream, your hope, your intent. But when we think about what that means for a company, and when a company asks that question, it looks very interestingly. Metaphorically, a company has a life of its own, right? We have feelings, we have a company culture, right? We have motivations, productivity within a company environment, our extended family, our coworkers, and our desire to sustain one's existence. Maybe that's our growth in our sales. And so when we ask this question to these particular companies, Starbucks, what is your purpose? Why do you exist? It's to sell coffee, right? No, that's the business that they're in. Their purpose sits above that. It's different than that. Starbucks' answer to that question, in their own words, would be to inspire and nurture the human spirit, one person, one cup, one neighborhood at a time. That's their purpose. Serta, the mattress company that operates in North America, when you ask what is your purpose, it's to sell mattresses. No, that's the business that they're in. Their purpose is to support the backbone of America. And for Airbnb, right? It's good. I think it's very clever. For Airbnb, their purpose is to create a community of belonging, right? So it's very important to distinguish the difference between the business that we're in and the purpose and why we exist. But what's the upside? What's the business case for purpose? What's the ROI? There's way too many statistics to go through on here, and each of these are cited, so I'm happy to share with this after. But some of my favorite ones are that for employees, the purpose is the number one motivating factor, and that there's 50% less turnover in companies that are purpose-driven, right? And from a sheer sales standpoint and growth standpoint, purpose-driven companies outperform their competitors 15-1. So having a company with purpose is not only beneficial, but you could argue that it's essential. And when you think about how to get to purpose, how is it an organization defines that, there is a methodology. There's these three key questions that are typically asked in a purpose journey. What do we have the potential to be the best at in the world? What are our strengths as an organization, as a brand, as a company? What do we care deeply about? What are our passions as an organization, as a brand? And then what sort of societal need are we going to fulfill? This idea that it's not enough to be a purpose-driven company if you're not actually engaging with the world and solving for something that's important. So, we asked this question at Wrangler, and we went through a 6-month purpose journey, and we explored this with everyone from our external stakeholders to our internal leadership. Employees received a survey, and we asked some of these very tough questions. What is our purpose? Why do we exist? And it's interesting because standing up here talking about this almost feels a little bit like I'm standing up here in my underwear. These slides weren't built for you guys; they were built internally. But when Andrew suggested that we discuss purpose, and that was sort of our entry into innovation, at least in this near-term journey, it made a lot of sense to share this detail. So, asking the question, who is your enemy, right? Who is Wrangler's enemy? Superficiality. What is it that with a legacy that we want to leave for the world? What is the purpose that we want to create? So I'm going to share that here with you today. If we were to answer that question, Wrangler, what is your purpose? We would answer, to empower everyone with the confidence to thrive in new frontiers. So make sure it goes up correctly. It's a very important statement. To empower everyone with the confidence to thrive in new frontiers. And what does that mean, right? Let's break it down. To empower is this idea that our values as a brand and where we've come from, inspire people. And everyone, we mean our employees, our associates, the communities in which we operate, the people that wear our product, our business associates, those in the retail partners who trust in us to put them on our retail floor. The confidence is the confidence of the cowboy of the American West. It's the confidence that we want our consumers to feel when you put on a pair of denim, of our Wranglers. But it's also the confidence that is required to navigate and thrive in a new frontier. It's not enough to just survive. We need to thrive. We need to accelerate. We need to be able to live in abundance. And the new frontier is not only the internal business challenges that we face. When someone from e-com reads this, they're like, man, my new frontier is D2C and e-com and that new tech platform, right? But when I read this, the new frontier is all the societal challenges that we face, all of the introduction that we saw with climate change and all the challenges around poverty and some of what the SDGs attempt to solve for. So thank you for letting me share that with you guys. There's one more. And when we look at our purpose journey and sort of where we've been and some things that are inspiring, we wanted to share from an innovation front some things that we are seeing that came from this purpose journey and that are also reflect back on our heritage. Recently, we've been inspired by a group of farmers and ranchers that are exploring new land stewardship practices on the earth, that are attempting to mimic ways of nature and soil management that we've seen in unprecedented ways. They look at the landscape of nature and study ecosystems and this plant-animal nexus like we scroll through apps on our phone, right? This is the world in which they live. And they have some pretty unique observations, in a world right now that is not too kind to their vocation, in a world where the critique is that livestock and beef have a negative detriment effect on our environment. And that's not entirely true. Deforestation, animal welfare, enteric emissions, those are all very real things. And we're not negating that or saying that it's not true. But one thing that these farmers and ranchers have uncovered, which is really meaningful, is this idea of using the soil and the land as a carbon sink, to use the interface between animals and plants to take excess carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and drive it into the earth where we have a deficit of it. It's similar to the way that bison used to roam the American grassland. They would come in droves of 8,000 to 10,000 animals, and they would defecate uniformly across the landscape. They would, bet no one's ever said that before at a transformer. Defecate uniformly. They would eat grass indiscriminately, right? So instead of having this free range like cattle do today and have the opportunity to eat their favorite grasses, they would eat everything, and then they wouldn't return for more than a year. And what is the effect that has? If you look at these two fields on the screen, which one do you think has been grazed? Any ideas? On the left? On the right. So it's been grazed using this method that I'm describing of this plant-animal nexus. Sometimes it's called adaptive multi-paddock grazing. Some people call it intensive rotational grazing. Some people call it mob grazing. The idea is that with the right herd density and the right amount of rest that happens on the soil, that we can be stewards of the earth, that these ranchers and farmers are able to create productive grasslands that are, again, driving that carbon into soils and ultimately creating a benefit to our environment and the planet. And so the science behind this is pretty compelling. A little bit of the detail here, this idea of having pasture or grass that's grazed for only a short period of time as opposed to a continuous amount of time. By having longer periods of rest as opposed to short periods of rest, what it allows the plant matter to do is create additional root structure and additional above ground flowering mass or biomass, and the results are compelling. This is a data set from the NRCS that shows after 2 years of adaptive multi-paddock grazing initiatives that we saw an increase of the biological community of more than 44% in this practice. Right, and so this is just the beginning. There's a gentleman named Dennis Hancock from University of Georgia, and I was at a grass-fed exchange conference where he presented on this topic. And he concluded the conference with this point, that if we were to use this type of ranching method in 10% of the degraded lands in the southeastern part of the United States, that we could, over the course of 1 to 3 years, sequester or drive carbon, enough carbon into soils to remove 3.6 billion, with a B, cars off the road. The next thing that happened in the room was unprecedented. A room full of ranchers, everybody stood up at the same time. It was just uncanny because they wanted to be a part of that solution. They wanted to be a part of what that scientific study was so compelling that they wanted to be a part of that on their own farm and ranch. Now, given it was the room of the converted, it was the Grass-Fed Exchange Conference, it was individuals who had come there to learn about these types of things, but it was so moving to me that it inspired me to ask this question: how might we do this in cotton? What is the opportunity to take a land stewardship approach with cotton growing? Danielle asked a very courageous question up here. She asked, is mass balance the system of the future? And she said, I don't think so. And I tend to agree with that. And I tend to agree with that because I think that there's so much impact and meaning that can happen with a land stewardship platform, that if we focus that same level of effort on land stewardship and healthy soils in cotton growing systems, then equally, this room could stand up, well, if we were all cotton growers, we could stand up and say, I want to be a part of that. Because when we revert to the science, and Wrangler spent some time to understand this, when we looked at 47 different scientific studies about the opportunity for land stewardship in cotton growing systems, we came up with the conclusion that 3 key agricultural practices have the opportunity to sequester 3 times the amount of carbon than a conventional practice. We're talking about cover crops, the use of cover crops. That's a non-cash crop in the off-season that helps restore nitrogen, if they're nitrogen fixers. There's a whole bunch of different types of cover: wheat, stubble, legumes. In eastern Tennessee, they use radishes to open up and penetrate the earth so the water infiltration will get down. It's like this weird cavity that rots away. Very odd looking. The second one would be a conservation tillage practice. This romantic vision of opening up the earth and letting the earth be exposed and the elements, the rain washing it away, that's kind of antiquated in this system. Ugly farming is the new green farming, right? This idea of having residue and biomass and stubble and just plowing 6 inches, dropping in a seed and elegantly covering over that seed and allowing that plant to grow through the biomass, that's conservation tillage. And that means that that soil will stay intact, living, dynamic, and biotic throughout the year. And crop rotation. And not just any crop rotation, but a complex crop rotation. 3 different crops in the same field over a 5-year time frame. There's a lot of wonderful crops out there. Cotton can be interspersed with corn, sorghum, peanut, you name it. There's a wide variety, and there's more to be discovered on this. But if we can implement and use these 3 practices, that ultimately the results are compelling. And if you're interested in more of the detail, we did write this science paper. It's available on our website that goes through all the data that supports the small infographic. So, and I did put it up here too, just so you don't have to go online and find it. It's right here. This is what the conclusion of the 47 different scientific papers said. That if we're talking about carbon sequestration, that no-till, cover crops, and crop rotation have an increased ability to solve for that issue. If we're talking about water infiltration and water retention, and why is that important? That's important in times of both drought and flooding. Water retention keeps that moisture on our cropland, and water infiltration gets it back down into the water table. These 3 practices have benefits in both water infiltration and water retention. And what if I were to say that if a grower were to utilize these practices, that an acre of cotton on an annual basis could drive as many benefits, ecosystem services benefits, as 3/4 of an acre of forest? That's confusing, perplexing, and is exactly what the science said. So the opportunity to look at our agricultural systems to solve for global issues such as climate and water, flooding and droughts is significant. And so for Wrangler, that's why this has been translating our purpose into action. Over the past 18 months, we've been investing into different soil health initiatives. We hosted an annual conference for the Future Farmers of America, youth that are dedicated to being future land stewards globally. But we're also investing in renewable energy. We have some exciting announcement coming out in 2019 about renewable energy in our supply chain and our commitment to renewable energy. We've been working in water conservation, and largely our initiatives have been around water recycling in our washdown process. But even more recently, we've been talking about foam dye in our partnership with Tohidas Royo and IMD and a few other companies. But even in the wake of disasters, which we know that is largely a result of increasing climate temperature, never before have we seen 5 major weather systems at the same time. And that happened. That happened in my home. Hurricane Florence came from North Carolina, South Carolina. My wife and I flew away to avoid the storm, and I was supposed to go to Vietnam that following week, but I couldn't because the Mangkhut typhoon was happening in Hong Kong and North Vietnam. 5 major weather systems all happening simultaneously. Only 2 of them hit landfall, but that is an unprecedented weather event. So decarbonizing our supply chain is incredibly important, as is going through that cycle of rebuild with those people that are negatively affected by climate change and natural disaster is increasingly important. So in terms of where that leaves us, purposeful transformation has been at the sort of epicenter of our innovation platform, looking at what solutions are required to thrive in new frontiers. And by no means does any one company have the monopoly over purpose. We all have an equal opportunity to drive purpose into our organizations, allow it to fuel innovation, and respond to this future generation of consumers that is demanding more of us, that is asking us to be purposeful and responsive to these societal needs. So, thank you.